Have you ever been like minding your own business at a holiday party?
Uh-huh.
You know, happily munching on a gingerbread cookie.
Right.
And then bam, someone decides it's the perfect time to launch into a whole thing about how Christmas is like some big pagan conspiracy.
Yeah, the holiday buzzkill. We've all been there.
Seriously, it can be so awkward. Like you're just trying to enjoy the festive vibes.
For sure.
But for some people, it's not just like a casual opinion. It's like a hardcore belief.
Right.
And today we're going deep into one group like that, the Members Church of God International.
MCGI.
Yeah, exactly, MCGI. And their reasons for why they don't celebrate Christmas.
It's really interesting, actually. It brings up all these questions about biblical interpretation and history and even some logic stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Here.
We've got a ton of sources to go through for this deep dive.
Okay, cool.
Transcripts from MCGI's own videos, where they explain their reasoning articles, debunking those claims, and even some pretty spicy Reddit threads from ex-members.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do. But before we jump into all the theology and stuff, I have to tell you this quick story.
Okay.
So last year I was at the grocery store a few days before Christmas, and I ran into this friend of mine who is like super anti-holiday air.
I'm intrigued already.
Okay, so picture this. They're at the store piling their cart with groceries, but they are like meticulously avoiding anything remotely festive. No candy canes, gingerbread men, not even a sprig of holly.
Wow, hardcore.
I know. So being the curious person I am, I asked about their holiday plans, and oh boy, they went off.
No way.
Yes, this epic monologue about the evils of commercialism and the pagan roots of Christmas. It was intense.
I bet you were trying so hard not to laugh.
Oh, I was dying.
Yeah.
Especially when they accidentally grabbed a box of Christmas chocolates.
Oh, no!
And then, like, threw it back on the shelf like it was on fire.
That's commitment.
It was hilarious.
Yeah.
But it also made me realize how seriously some people take this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And while my friend wasn't from MCGI, their passion reminded me a lot of the group we're talking about today.
Right. Well, MCGI is definitely known for its strong stance against celebrating Christmas.
For sure.
Their arguments come from how they interpret the Bible and their belief that many traditions are unbiblical or have pagan roots.
So let's get into their specific arguments.
Yeah.
They have this YouTube video laying it all out.
Okay.
And one of their big points is about the weather in Bethlehem in December.
Okay. The weather.
Yeah, so they say the shepherds taking care of their flocks, you know, the ones in the nativity story.
Yeah.
They couldn't have been out in the fields in December because Bethlehem would have been covered in snow.
Interesting.
They even show pictures of Bethlehem covered in snow in the video, like really trying to drive home the point that it would have been way too cold for shepherds to be out there with their sheep.
I see.
And they literally say, how could Christ have been born in December when there was thick snow? The sheep were in the field. What were the sheep and the shepherds going to eat?
Okay, so they're using the practical argument of, like, survival.
Exactly. It's a pretty vivid picture they paint.
Yeah.
But does it actually hold up?
Good question.
Well, that's where the counter-arguments come in. And it's fascinating because they basically debunk this whole thing by pointing out that historical weather data for Bethlehem actually shows that winters there are pretty mild.
Really?
Yeah, the average temperatures are somewhere between 43 and 57 degrees Fahrenheit.
So not exactly blizzard conditions.
Right, not at all.
Right.
And while it might snow sometimes in Bethlehem, it's not the kind of heavy snowfall that would make it impossible for shepherds to be out there.
Interesting.
Plus, historical records suggest that shepherds in that region did graze their sheep outdoors year-round, even in the winter.
So that whole snow-covered Bethlehem argument kind of falls apart.
It does, when you consider the actual historical and geographical context.
Oh, okay.
But that's just one piece of the puzzle. MCGI also says that celebrating Christmas isn't even in the Bible.
Okay.
That's a common argument, yeah. They emphasize that the Bible doesn't say when exactly Jesus was born, and it definitely doesn't tell Christians to celebrate it.
And they're right about that. The exact date isn't mentioned in the Bible.
Exactly. And they even quote the Catholic Encyclopedia to back this up.
Oh, wow. Using a source from another Christian denomination.
Yeah, to show that even Catholics acknowledge that no one knows for sure when Jesus was born.
Clever tactic.
But here's the thing. The counter-arguments turn this whole line of reasoning back on MCGI.
How so?
Well, they point out that MCGI celebrates other things that aren't specifically commanded in the Bible, too, like Nisan 1 baptism dates,
Yeah.
even the anniversary of their TV program.
Interesting. So they're picking and choosing which traditions they consider valid.
Exactly. It seems like they apply biblical principles inconsistently.
Like a double standard almost.
Right. They reject Christmas because it's not explicitly in the Bible, but then they embrace other non-biblical celebrations.
It makes you wonder, where do they draw the line?
It does. And that's what makes this debate so fascinating. What makes a Christian tradition legitimate, and who gets to decide?
Those are big questions. Questions that people have been debating for centuries.
Definitely. And looking at MCGI's stance on Christmas is a really interesting way to explore those bigger issues of biblical interpretation and religious authority.
I agree. It's a unique lens through which to view these broader debates.
Absolutely.
And it really shows you that, like, in any religion, you're going to have different interpretations and practices.
Yeah, totally. What one group thinks is super important, another might see as like optional or even wrong.
Exactly.
And things get even more interesting when we get to the arguments against Christmas based on its supposed pagan origins.
Right. The whole idea that Christmas is just a pagan holiday in disguise.
Yeah.
Like it's all based on ancient Roman festivals like Saturnalia.
Yeah, MCGI points to all sorts of Christmas traditions as having pagan roots, gift-giving, decorating trees, even the date itself.
But the counter-arguments push back on that. They say that just because something started as pagan doesn't mean it can't be changed and given a new Christian meaning.
Like how the early Christians took the Roman cross, which was originally a symbol of death and torture, and made it into a symbol of Christ's victory over death.
Exactly. A powerful example of how symbols can change meaning over time.
Totally. And the counter-arguments say the same thing could be true for Christmas traditions. They say that even if some of these traditions did come from paganism, Christians reinterpreted them and gave them a new focus, celebrating Jesus' birth instead of any pagan gods.
It's really interesting how cultures adapt and reinterpret traditions over time.
It is. It makes you wonder, does where a tradition comes from really determine what it means today?
That's a good question.
And speaking of good questions, we found some really thought-provoking comments from people who used to be in MCGI on Reddit.
Oh, yeah, the Reddit threads.
They share their experiences with the Christmas ban, and some of them were pretty intense.
I can imagine. It's a big deal for a lot of people.
For sure. One Redditor, I007, said something that really stuck with me. They said, in MCGI, they don't celebrate Jesus. They celebrate the leader's birthday.
Wow. That's a strong statement.
It is. And I think it shows how some ex-members feel like MCGI focuses more on their leader than on the core beliefs of Christianity.
Yeah. It seems like they're saying Christmas is wrong because it's not in the Bible, but then they're okay celebrating other things that aren't biblical as long as it has to do with the leader.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like another example of them not being consistent with how they interpret the Bible.
Right. And how their own biases might be influencing their interpretations.
And then there's this whole thing with the word Pasko.
Oh, yeah. What about it?
So Redditor Valuable Broad 3646 brought this up. Apparently when someone asks MCGI about celebrating Christmas, they'll say yes.
Okay.
But they're actually talking about Pasko as a time of rest, not the holiday of Christmas.
Ah, so it's like a wordplay thing.
Exactly. They're using the fact that Pasko can mean both rest and Christmas in Filipino to avoid giving a straight answer.
That's kind of sneaky.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like saying, I love going to the bank, but do you mean the financial institution or the edge of a river? It depends on the context.
Right. The context is key.
And in this case, MCGI is using that ambiguity to their advantage. They seem like they're acknowledging Christmas, but they're not really.
It makes you question how open and honest they're being about this whole issue.
It does. So we've talked about MCGI's argument against Christmas, looked at the counterpoints. But now I think we need to step back and look at the history of Christmas celebrations.
That's a good point. Sometimes understanding the history of something can help you understand its meaning today.
Right. And we have this great video for that inspiring philosophy. It goes deep into the history of Christmas and debunks a lot of the myths about its pagan origins.
Like what kind of myths?
Well, for example, they argue that the date December 25th was chosen by early Christians for theological reasons, not because of paganism.
Interesting. So why December 25th?
Well, some early Christians believe that Jesus was conceived on March 25th.
Okay.
And that's 9 months before December 25th.
I see where this is going.
And there was this old Jewish tradition that said a prophet dies on the same day he was conceived.
Ah.
So they connected Jesus' death on the cross, which they believed happened on March 25th, with his conception.
And 9 months later is December 25th.
Exactly. So it wasn't about paganism. It was about their theological ideas.
Wow, that's fascinating how these theological ideas shaped early Christian traditions.
It is. And the video also talks about the origins of Santa Claus and the Yule log.
Oh, yeah, those are big ones.
They say Santa Claus comes from St. Nicholas, a 4th century Christian bishop who was known for being super generous, especially to kids.
Okay, so not a pagan god.
Nope. and his legendary kindness and gift-giving eventually turned into the Santa Claus we know today.
That makes sense.
And they also debunked the myth that the Yule log has pagan roots.
Really? I just thought that was a pagan thing.
They say the first time it was mentioned was in 1648 in a collection of English poetry. And back then, it wasn't even called a Yule log. It's just a Christmas log.
Interesting.
The word Yule referred to a midwinter period in some languages, but not to a specific pagan holiday. The connection to paganism came much later.
So it's another example of the story we tell about a tradition not matching up with the facts.
Exactly. When you look closer, you often find a more complicated and interesting story.
I like that.
So while some people might see Christmas as a pagan leftover, a deeper look at the history suggests it's more about Christian ideas and how cultures change over time.
It shows how traditions are always evolving and how different cultures and religions influence them.
It's like there's this whole hidden world behind every tradition just waiting to be discovered.
You know, it really is. And it reminds us that history isn't always so simple.
Definitely. There are always more layers to uncover. So we've looked at MCGI's arguments against Christmas, counterpoints, and we've even gone back in time to see where these traditions came from. But I think there's one more thing we need to talk about: the personal side of this debate.
That's a good point, because for a lot of people, Christmas is about so much more than just a date on the calendar.
Exactly. It's about memories and family traditions and feelings of joy and connection.
For sure. And for some people, like those ex-MCGI members we heard from on Reddit, the ban on Christmas can be really tough.
Absolutely. They talked about feeling isolated and judged, and even resentful. It can really put a strain on relationships and make people feel like they don't belong.
Yeah. It shows you how difficult it can be when your personal beliefs clash with what your religion teaches.
And it makes you realize that even rules that are meant to be good can sometimes have unintended consequences on people's lives.
Definitely. It's a sensitive issue, and it's important to remember that everyone has their own journey and their own understanding of faith.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive into an MCGI stance on Christmas, I want to leave you with a question to think about. If we don't know the exact date Jesus was born, does it actually make the celebration more meaningful to pick a day to celebrate? It lets us focus on the event itself instead of worrying about the calendar.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. Maybe setting aside a specific time to think about Jesus' birth helps us appreciate it more deeply.
It's definitely something to think about, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below telling us what you learned from this deep dive. What stood out to you the most about MCGI's views on Christmas?
Thanks for joining us on this journey. It's always amazing to have these conversations with you all.
This ain't about trees or dates, it's about redemption, tearing down gates. If you're holding tradition in a cage of doubt, it's time to break free, let's start off. Christmas ain't biblical, leave it behind. But look at their practices, are they divine? Celebrating Nisan, no command for that. Baptism dates, where the scripture at? TV anniversaries, walk of faith, pride. But when it's Christmas, they run and hide. Double standards, let's call it exposed. Truth's in the word and the logic implodes. Unwrap the truth, let the light shine bright. Celebrate the birth, it's a holy night. If grace redeems, then the season is clear. Jesus is the reason we're gathered here. Pagan claims, let's dissect. Even the cross had a darker respect. Paul quoted pagans to reveal God's face, turning the culture to a sacred space. December 25th, just a date they chose, symbolic like the path where the gospel grows. If tradition aligns with the Savior's name, then what's the harm in spreading his fame? Unwrap the truth, let the light shine bright. Celebrate the birth, it's a holy night. If grace redeems, then the season is clear. Jesus is the reason we're gathered here. Shepherds in the field, the weather was fine. Bethlehem winter stood the test of time. Stop cherry picking what fits the claim. The gospel stands strong, unchanged, untamed. Traditions redeemed from the tree to the gift. Symbols of grace make the soul uplift. Romans 14, let the conscience decide. Celebrate with Christ, let the spirit abide. Unwrap the truth, let the light shine bright. Celebrate the birth, it's a holy night. If grace redeems, then the season is clear. Jesus is the reason we're gathered here. Traditions won't save you, but grace will sustain. So celebrate the King who forever reigns. No room for the doubt, let the gospel ignite. Merry Christmas to all, stand firm in the light.